The president of the Nigeria Bar Association, NBA Olumide Akpata, is condemning the clampdown on NSAS promoters by the Nigerian government. Akpata expressed displeasure at the government's action against the leaders of the #NSAS protesters. The NBA president, in a post on his Facebook page, said the actions of the government were contrary to its earlier disposition. Akpata wrote, quote, "With all that's going on in the aftermath of the #NSAS protest, lawyers are definitely not smiling." DJ Switch _ has gone into hiding after receiving threatening phone calls. Mo Odele's passport was seized and she has been prevented from traveling outside the country. And Rinu Oduala and many others have had their accounts frozen by the CBN. This was not the deal, end quote.
And a civil society organization, the Rule of Law Accountability and Advocacy Center, RULAC, has faulted the decision of the Lagos State Commissioner of Police, Hakeem Odumosu, to clamp down on peaceful protesters in the state. The Lagos State Command had said that it would resist any form of protest, whether peaceful or violent. Well, joining us now to discuss the legal implications of the order banning protesters is legal practitioner Joe NWOKEDI. Many thanks for joining us today on Newsday, Mr. NWOKEDI, to look at this in more detail. Of course, many have come out to fault the Lagos State Commissioner of Police, Hakeem Odumosu, for banning protests in the state. It's quite similar to something we saw in 2014 in Abuja, where the Commissioner of Police there at the time, Joseph Mbu, got an order to try and ban the Bring Back Our Girls protests. But of course, the court ruled in favor of BBOG. Does the CP have any legal ground whatsoever to do what he's doing here?
Not at all. The directive by the Commissioner of Police or order by the Commissioner of Police is outrightly unlawful, illegal, and contravenes the provisions of the Constitution. This is a democracy, and in democracy we have to abide by the provisions of the law. The law is supreme. The law overrides every other authority, every other institution, or any other person or individual. Everybody is brought under the provisions of the law and under the dictates of the law. Right to protest is inalienable right of every citizen of any democratic society. Democracy has its own components. And when you adopt democracy as a system of government, you have to adopt all apparatus of democracy. You don't just do pick and choose. So for the fact we have adopted democracy as our own form of government, it behoves that we must also adopt all the characteristics, all the tenets, and everything associated with democracy. And in democratic dispensation, as encapsulated in our own constitutional section 39, which clearly states that citizens have the right to express themselves. That is otherwise known as freedom of expression. In a democratic system of government, you have the right to express yourself. And protest is part of that right you have to express yourself. And again, coming down to that another section of the Constitution again of Nigeria, 1999 as amended, Section 40 also gave us the freedom to freely assemble and associate. So in carrying out a protest, you also associate, you also assemble. And then Section 41 also gave us the right to move freely throughout the whole Federation of Nigeria and any part thereof. So if you read these three sections together, it gives you the right to protest. In protesting, you are expressing whatever grievance, whatever displeasure, whatever policy of the government that is not comfortable, that you consider abusive, that you consider illegal, that you consider abnormal, that you consider anti-people. In the process of protest, you create the awareness. You bring the consciousness of other people, consciousness of people within that democratic entity or territory, even the consciousness of people outside that jurisdiction, I mean entire world, to become aware of a practice, of a procedure, of a project, of a program, of a government that has been considered as being anti-people, anti-development. So these are ingredients of democracy. These are things that actually made democracy a system of government. But unfortunately and dishearteningly, in Nigeria here, we just adopted democracy without adopting other arms, other characteristics, other things that go with democracy. So for Commissioner of Police to come out and say that he's banning protests, I mean, it's ultra-virus. He has gone beyond the powers granted to him by the Constitution. Nobody. The Constitution is very, very supreme. It's a recourse, it's several.
Mr. NWOKEDI, if you can hear me now, okay? I've been trying to get to you for a bit there. For the purpose of this conversation and arguments in some spaces, the excuse of violence erupting after the protests, is this tenable for the police to take this unconstitutional and definitely undemocratic move?
Thank you so much for calling it unconstitutional. See, there are things we need to know about all these movements. We have so many issues associated with democracy as a citizens' way of expressing their grievances. We have protests. We have the solidarity march. We have procession. We have rallies. We have press conferences. Then we have riots, and we have revolution. So these are categories of aspects of expressing grievances, expressing kind of displeasure over the affairs of the government. And you have to separate them. Protest has its own components. Protest has its own characteristics. Then riot has its own components. Riot has its own characteristics. Then you talk of revolution, it has its own components. That was why when some people called for revolution, government was like, no, we cannot accept that. Revolution has its own components. Revolution can lead to change of government without the ballot boxes. Protest cannot do that. Protest has its own, what we saw during the NSAS, the 11 days they protested before the shooting at the Lekki toll gate, was a pure protest. They were carrying placards, they have inscriptions on the placards, they clearly marshaled their grievances, what they considered as being the abuse of the government or against their own interests. Protesters are known. You see them, you cover them. Televisions and media houses cover them. You walk around with them. Police also accompany them to lead them, to guide them. So you can't just ban protests. But if you're talking of riots, we're talking of what happened after the Lekki toll gate saga, the looting. These people were not protesters. Protests ended the night of the shooting. Right. We knew those that actually protested. Right, the looting was not carried out by protesters. They did not carry placards. They were not seen. They were carrying arms. Police can go after people that actually, the so-called hoodlums, that looted and maimed and destroyed properties. That doesn't mean that the police will now ban a legitimate practice. Police should separate, should distill, should dissect between protests and then riots. Right, even Joe, the Constitution gave them riot for when there is a riot, they can suppress.
Joe, if you can hear me. All right. The spokesperson of the police, Adejobi, here says, I'm quoting what it says. It says the police and other security agencies will collectively and tactically resist any security threat to public peace, which might be triggered by protest or protesters. Isn't that enough ground to take this action with the benefit of hindsight? What do you think?
You can't throw away the baby with the bathwater. We have so many challenges facing us all over the places. Even the families, it cannot just because something might lead to something, then throw away what is legitimate, what is captured in our Constitution, what is captured in our laws, the freedom granted to the citizens of Nigeria by the Constitution. You're now out of an issue that you're supposed to ensure that is properly kind of carried out. Police supposed to follow up protesters, monitor protesters, provide security to protectors. And when they begin to do whatever that might be considered illegal, you can arrest the people. Police officers have the right to arrest, reasonably suspect, and arrest, and detain, and prosecute. Nobody is arguing over these powers. But it's only when such offense has been committed. You can't presume that because offense might be committed, and as a result of that, stop citizens of a country from exercising their legitimate rights. You have to watch out when that offense is almost about to be committed. And how would that offense to be about to be committed is when the process is becoming something chaotic. And in that process, you stop it. That's the essence of policing. We even saw in the American election that just happened. I think in the state of New York or whatever, where campaign was about becoming chaotic. Police people were there trying to separate fights, trying to bar people from getting close to a vehicle, trying to stop them from removing the posters and other whatever they have in other opponents' campaign vehicles. They stopped that. They didn't say Americans cannot come out because violence might erupt. That is completely absurd. That is completely crude. That is completely ridiculous. And we cannot allow that to happen in our own democracy. Because this is a democracy, like I said earlier, is a system of government that has its own procedures. It has its own kind of characteristics. So police cannot say because NSAS eventually degenerated into a chaotic situation, which their own action, the action of the executive, in one way or the other, directly or remotely caused. For 11 days that NSAS protesters were on the road, we saw them. They didn't do anything illegal. I saw them near my office in Allen. I passed through them. I passed through there several times. They were just there singing and dancing and letting the world know their grievances about Nigerian police and other form of kind of government policies that they may not like. So anybody suggesting because NSAS protests might lead to crisis, that person should examine his head. If it's actually a security agent that said that, then that person should be relieved of his duty. You don't presume a crime will be committed. You can't come and arrest me, say that I look like someone that might commit crime when I start driving out of this place. I have the kind of attitude that I might commit crime. That is not, it's not legal. That is absurd. No law in Nigeria considers or envisions such a practice. So people of Lagos State, they have absolute right to protest. And police should give them protection.
Thank you.
That's what is obtainable in any democratic dispensation. And we are practicing democracy. If you are tired of democracy in Nigeria, we should petition it and imbibe our system of government. But for the fact we are still in democracy, we must imbibe the tenets, the ethics, and all the features of democracy.
Thank you. Mr. NWOKEDI, let me ask you then, because that's a very fair enough point that you just made. With this statement or this order from the CP of Police in Lagos, how do you advise those who want to peacefully protest to go about this? Should this be a matter that's handled in courts? Because even though it's one's right to peacefully protest, the fact that the CP has come out to say this kind of puts a sense of danger into the air for anyone who wants to go out right now and exercise their fundamental rights as enshrined in the 1999 Constitution.
For me, it's a mere order. No court gazetted it. A protest is not something that can be proscribed. It's not a terrorist organization. It's not a kind of insurrection. It's not a kind of anything at all that you can say. And the police did not even go ahead to gazette it. So as far as I'm concerned, it's not law. It just is mere expression. But if people feel like, look, like this pronouncement might trigger a kind of brutal approach from the police towards the citizens, they might go to court to tell the court to bring the notice before the honorable court, then to vacate that mere expression. Because as far as I'm concerned, what the Commissioner of Police said is mere expression. It's not written down anywhere. It's not documented in our law. No court of law gave it as a ruling. No court of law gazetted it. So he just, he's on his own. He just merely expressed himself and says something. But for citizens that might become kind of afraid because of such problem, but for me, I am not. If I have any reason that will make me to protest as a Nigerian, the one that the Constitution gave me the right, the Constitution that said in Section 1 that this Constitution is supreme and is a force of binding effect on all laws and authorities throughout the federation of the whole Nigeria. And if any law, including that of the police, or the president, or the governors, is inconsistent with the provisions of this Constitution, that law shall, to the extent of its inconsistency, to the extent be rendered null and void and of no effect. So the pronouncement by the police chief is null and void and of no effect because it runs contrary to the provisions of the Constitution, which is the supreme law, the ground norm of the land. So for those that might feel afraid, but for me it's a mere expression.
Unfortunately, Mr. NWOKEDI, that mere expression has been carried out by several officers, as we did monitor one protest in the NWOKEDI area of Lagos last weekend, where the police even told our crew not to film and went ahead to disrupt what eventually from a protest had to turn into a press conference on the road. And they were disrupted, manhandled by police officers. So you say it's mere pronouncement by the CP of police in Lagos, but his men are carrying out the order. So would you say the CP should withdraw his mere statement?
He should withdraw that. And any party that feels aggrieved, as contained as Section 46 of the Constitution, it's very clear. If any citizen of Nigeria feels that his right has been abused or is about to be abused, he shall approach the court. If your crew or any other crew had gone out to cover a protest and the likelihood of that, a peaceful one, very, very peaceful protest, such a group will approach the court. They can seek legal advice, go to court, then obtain that order, and then claim against the police. There are so many cases, I don't want to start saying it, we even have in our chambers against the police. You go to court, you claim against them. You file fundamental rights enforcement action against them. And you bring the issue before the court. And the court that is already abreast of what the law says, or the Constitution says, should give an order against the police. So what I think that any good citizen of Nigeria should do, especially those that have been aggrieved, those that have actually been affected by the action of police, or those that wanted to protest and police stopped them, at least they have a greater ground before the court to present the issue, appear before the court, make their issues known before the court, present their issues very, very well as they occurred, and then court will give ruling. But as far as I'm concerned, police officer has no right whatsoever to ban peaceful protests. The only thing he can do is when protest is about to go wide or go violent, they should arrest those that actually perpetrated that crime. You don't just go out and then ban what is legal, ban what is constitutional. Because if we begin to allow this kind of attitude to take root in our democracy, then one day a police can wake up and tell nobody to move. If it is governor's fiat, at least it may have a kind of constitutional flavor by the executive powers. But the powers of the police derive from where? Where is police deriving their powers from? Is it the president that issued a fiat? Is it the governor that issued a fiat? I mean, powers of the police must be in line with the powers given to the police by Police Act. That's to maintain peace, law and order, and other things associated with that, and not to meddle or interfere with the express provisions of the Constitution.
All right, Joe, we'll leave it there. Joe NWOKEDI, lawyer, thank you so much for your interesting analysis, your points there.